Hey there! Today we're going to talk about this ink, Lamy Green. I think this is an interesting ink. I don't use it a lot, but I do think it's fascinating. If nothing else, then the bottle is very fascinating. Lamy, it has this weird shape and it has this little white thing sticking out of it. This is a roll of blotting paper, which is in the bottom of the bottle. The useful thing about that is it's not meant to be put on paper, it's just meant to wipe the nib when you have filled up the pen, which is very useful. You can in fact take the plastic thing off and replace the roll, I'm assuming. Something that's really fascinating is the shape of the bottle. This is the actual bottle of ink, and this is a nice thing which looks a little odd, but you actually put your pen in there. So there's always ink, even when the ink levels run dry, the ink collects in there, and you should really be able to get, the last bits of ink out. So I think that's a very nice touch. As to the green, it's a sort of apple-like green, I would say. It's nice. It can be a little dry, but so far I really haven't had a lot of problems with that. It dries fairly quickly. It has generally good flow properties, no real issues. I think it's a pretty good ink. Something I will try to do from now on is incorporate an ink that looks like this. Today that is Vert, which is a little bit lighter, but I thought that it would be interesting to try and do that, and some people commented that they would find that interesting. For that I will just use a glass pen. I will not do an extensive writing sample because then these videos will get way too long. So I'll just I'll just write the name of the ink at the bottom end of the paper, and that's all there's to it. So there you have it. I think we need a writing sample, and that's what we're going to do next. I hope this is going to be useful, and I'll see you later. Bye bye. Okay, so here we go with Lamy Green. The astute among you may have noticed that this is not the pen I usually use for these Inkcyclopedia entries. For flexing, I tended to use this one. Unfortunately, this one seems to have died. It's impossible to get good flow with it anymore. I don't know what exactly happened, it just died. I've done a lot of nib adjustments, but alas. So, I'll go on with this one. And today we'll have a look at this nice Lamy apple kind of green, I would say. Medium. Broad. Italic. I just had a discussion with someone on this specific pen, the Parsons Essential by Italics, and he said this doesn't seem to be a very typical italic. Now, I think it's a cursive italic, which means that you will not get as much line variation as with a crisp italic. That's right. This is easier to write with, though, which is also worth something. Okay, let's do a couple of passes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Come back to those in a second. But for now, let's try to do a bit of flex writing. So, I think this gives you a nice saturated green, quite dark, flows well, dries quickly. I think this is already dry, yes. Second pass. Let's try to squeeze out a bit more saturation from the medium nib. It's quite hard nib, not very easy. Broad. This way you can really bring out some of the shading in the ink, even causing the pen to railroad a little because of the pressure. I don't think this is a crazily shaded ink, but there definitely is shading. If you have a look at this, you will see that there are, some darker patches and some lighter patches. As I said, it's not a crazy shader, but it's definitely there. And if you lay down a lot of ink, you'll definitely see a variation in the intensity of the ink. Is this dry? Oh, let's give that a few more seconds. Italic. As you can see, you can actually get the italic idea, but it's easier to make these kinds of shapes with a cursive italic. Okay, I think this is dry enough. Come back to those in a second. Let's have some water testing. My expectation is that water is going to kill this ink, because when I have this in my hands I can very easily wash it off. I don't think this is the most waterproof of inks. But let's put that to the test. While those things are drying, let us return to those passes tests. As you can see, in a non-saturated nib, it's a green. It's a dark green. There are darker greens out there. Check out my Inkcyclopedia entry for Lierre Sauvage by Germain. That's a very dark green. This is a bit lighter, but it gives some nice effects. With a very saturated nib, a very wet, broad nib, for example, you could get something like this, which is a much darker green than this is, and of course there's something in between there. Note the shading. I mean, in this italic pen you can actually see some shading. I have to say, this is an ink I don't exactly use on a daily basis. I don't use it a lot. I got it at some point, along with a pen. And it's an interesting ink, it has good properties, but I'm not a huge fan of the color. When I want a green, I personally like a darker, more saturated green, like Lierre Sauvage or Private Reserve Avocado, for example. But, okay, let's have a look at this. Grabbing some water. And some more water. And a sneeze. And we just wait and see what happens. But in the meantime, meanwhile in Gotham City, we're going to do a scorecard. Cleaning. Well, that is nothing short of excellent. I've used this ink. I don't use it on a daily basis, as I said, but I know it's very water soluble, so it's very easy to clean out of your pens. Bleed through. I expect that to be excellent, but we'll check it out. Color. Well, I'm pretty sure that's green. What else have we got? We've got shading. Well, shading is okay, I guess. I mean, there definitely is shading. You even see it in this medium, fairly hard nib. Not as pronounced as with some inks, but, you know, better than others, I guess. So, flow. Flow is very good. I've had no issues with this whatsoever. Drying time. Well, you've seen that even 3 passes of a 6mm nib dried up fairly quickly, so I would say that is very good. Waterproofness. Waterproofness. I'll come back to that once that is dry, but I think it's not going to be particularly good. Feathering. I have to check out some cheap copier paper before I make a decision on that, but so far things look good. Okay, so here we have the writing. As you can see, the writing is eliminated almost completely by the water. I'll just blot it to get rid of the excess water. Of course, that induces some nice stains, but as you can see, the writing is just gone. It's no longer there. So waterproofness, I would say, is non-existent. The calligraphy letter, wider nib, you see that parts of it are still legible, but I mean, let's face it, this is no longer recognizable. So waterproofness, I would say, is quite poor. I enjoy finding the right adjectives, of course. Quite poor. It's not as bad as extremely poor, but it's not good either. Okay. That was this part. Let's have a look at some copier paper. This is some copier paper. I'll grab a pen and then I will write on this copier paper. It's always a good idea to check out some copier paper. Alright, fine. By the way, did I mention that this is in fact copier paper? Fine. This is copier paper. Medium. Is it? Yes. Broad. Copier paper is what this is. I love copier paper. Oh, BKB, let's have a look at some feathering. I don't really see any feathering, even in the broad nibs. But, let's put this to the test by taking a huge nib some of the poorest calligraphy ever shown. Huge and flexy. Railroading once more. Why, nudeless pen, do you challenge me, sir? Flexing. Now that is some serious flexage. Or, as some would say, flex appeal. Okay. Now, if that doesn't induce feathering, I don't know what will. Rockablotter. There we go. Well, isn't that funny? That looks like a beautiful piece of art. Except it's not beautiful and not really a piece of art. So what do we have? The regular writing, I don't see any feathering. I don't see a whole lot of bleed through. There is a little bit there, but that's with a broad nib. With an italic nib. Well, actually, I even see a little bit with a fine nib. So this ink is a bit prone to bleed through. Flex writing, or fat nib writing, actually does bleed through quite a bit. As to feathering, it's definitely there with the really wide 6mm nib, and it's definitely there with the flex nib. Now, I did actually blot that, but even before that, you can see the bits here, but there definitely is feathering going on. Okay, if we have a look at the Rhodia paper, feathering really is absent. But we know that Rhodia is excellent paper. Bleed through a little bit, but these are 3 passes with a 6mm nib. So clearly, as always, this will depend on the paper, but assuming that you do not write on Rhodia every day, I would say that bleed through is present on cheaper paper. Feathering in when using a lot of ink. I think that's not unreasonable to say. Okay, so one thing I would like to do, and you can help me with that, is try and compare this ink to other inks. And one ink that just pops to my mind is Vert Reseda by Gerbin. Now, I don't have the time to cover a million other inks here, but let me just do a quick writing sample in Vert Reseda. For this, I'll be using my glass dip pen and a small bottle of ink. Comparison. Vert Reseda by Gerbin. There probably are other inks. There must be other inks that look like this. As you can see, Vert Reseda is a little bit lighter. It's a type of green I'm not a huge fan of, but it reminds me a little bit of this ink. So what about you? You've got any inks that look like Lamy green? Let me know in the comments. That's always useful, also for other people, you know, who are looking for the ultimate green or something. And that's all there's to it. So, Inkcyclopedia entry for Lamy green. I hope this was useful, and I'll see you later. Bye bye.